He doesn't know it yet, but he may just have stumbled onto the answer, some people think, of a great biblical mystery.
The mystery of Noah's Ark.
For millennia, the story of Noah's Ark, a colossal vessel built to survive a world-engulfing flood, has captivated imaginations. It's a cornerstone narrative for billions, yet largely relegated to the realm of faith or myth. But what if tangible evidence surfaced? In early 2025, startling reports emerged from Turkey suggesting archaeologists might be closer than ever. The focus? A mysterious boat-shaped formation known as Durupinar, located near the legendary Mount Ararat.
Uzungili, Turkey. The flight is routine until he spots something strange, the remains of a large ship.
What in the world would a boat be doing way up there?
Could this finally be the resting place of Noah's Ark, or is it another false dawn in a centuries-long search? Let's investigate. The story of this potential discovery doesn't begin in 2025, but decades earlier, rooted in the rugged landscape of eastern Turkey. The Durupinar site, named after the Turkish army captain İlhan Durupinar, who documented it during a NATO aerial mapping mission in 1951, wasn't initially linked to the Ark by him. Its peculiar shape was first noticed even earlier in 1948 by a local Kurdish farmer navigating the terrain. Situated about 18 miles south of the towering peak of Mount Ararat, the formation rests in a region steeped in the biblical narrative. Genesis tells of the Ark coming to rest upon the mountains of Ararat after the Great Flood subsided. This geographical connection alone was enough to pique interest. The structure itself is striking. It's a large, distinctly boat-like shape embedded in the terrain, measuring approximately 538 feet or 164 meters long. Geologically, it's composed largely of limonite, a type of iron ore mixed with earth and rock, giving it a solidified, almost fossilized appearance. Its visual resemblance to a massive ancient hull, partially buried and conforming to the surrounding slopes, has fueled speculation for over 70 years. Explorers, researchers, and devout believers have visited the site, drawn by the tantalizing possibility that this geological anomaly could be the petrified remains of the biblical vessel. The dimensions are particularly compelling to proponents, aligning remarkably well with the Ark's description in Genesis 6:15, 300 cubits long. Depending on the ancient cubit measurement used, typically estimated between 18 and 22 inches, this yields a length anywhere from 450 to 515 feet, placing the Durupinar formation squarely within or very near that range. This proximity in both location and size to the biblical account has kept the site firmly on the map for Ark hunters, despite numerous geological studies over the years suggesting natural origins. But if this site has been known for so long, why the sudden surge of excitement in 2025? What prompted headlines suggesting a major breakthrough? The renewed focus stems from a concerted effort launched in 2021 by the Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark research team. This wasn't just a small group of enthusiasts, it represented a collaboration involving experts from Istanbul Technical University, Ara Ibrahim Chechen University, located near the site itself, and Andrews University in the United States, known for its Seventh-day Adventist affiliation and long-standing interest in Ark research. Their project aimed to apply modern scientific techniques to investigate the Durupinar formation more systematically than perhaps ever before. For several years, their work progressed relatively quietly. Then in early 2025, the team presented preliminary findings at the 7th International Symposium on Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark. This conference provided a platform to share results that, according to reports circulating around March of that year, suggested the Durupinar formation might be more than just an interesting geological quirk. They hinted at evidence challenging the purely natural explanations, reigniting the debate and capturing significant media attention. The implication was clear. After years of dedicated research, they believed they had uncovered data pointing towards an artificial origin, potentially linked to the legendary flood narrative. Intriguing announcements are one thing, but what actual evidence did the research team reportedly present that caused such a stir? Let's delve into the specific findings that emerged in early 2025, according to reports from the symposium and subsequent news coverage around March 2025. The Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark research team highlighted several key pieces of data. First, and perhaps most significantly, they discussed the analysis of soil and rock samples collected from within and around the boat-shaped structure. These samples reportedly contained traces of marine materials, including microscopic marine fossils and specific types of clay and sediments typically associated with an underwater environment. Crucially, the dating performed on these materials allegedly placed them between 3,500 and 5,000 years old, roughly 3000 BCE to 1500 BCE. This timeframe overlaps remarkably well with timelines proposed by some biblical scholars for the Great Flood, often estimated around 2500 to 3000 BCE. The presence of marine indicators at an elevation of around 6,500 feet above sea level, far from any current sea, was presented as strong evidence that the site was once submerged under a significant body of water, potentially lending credence to a large-scale flood event in the region's past. Second, the team re-emphasized the sheer dimensional consistency. While the length, around 538 feet, matching the 300-cubit biblical description, had long been noted, the 2025 reports also highlighted the width and implied height. The formation is roughly 148 feet wide and estimated to be around 49 feet high. Comparing this to the biblical ark's dimensions of 50 cubits wide and 30 cubits high, using the same cubit range, 18 to 22 inches, gives widths of 75 to 92 feet and heights of 45 to 55 feet. While the width match is less precise than the length, proponents argued the overall proportions and scale remained too suggestive of the biblical ark to be dismissed as mere coincidence or pareidolia, the human tendency to see familiar shapes in random patterns. They suggested erosion and geological processes over millennia could account for some dimensional discrepancies, particularly the increased width due to slumping or spreading of material. Third, and potentially most controversial, were claims regarding evidence of ancient human activity and organic materials. Some reports mentioned the analysis of clay-like substances found within the formation yielded results indicative of decayed organic matter. Furthermore, there were renewed mentions of possible petrified wood fragments. While claims of petrified wood at Darupanar date back decades, often linked to researcher Ron Wyatt, whose findings are widely disputed, the 2025 team suggested their analysis pointed towards materials potentially dating back to the period of 5,500 to 3,000 BCE. This timeframe again overlaps with the proposed flood era. However, specifics remained scarce. Were these definitively worked timbers? Were they present in quantities suggesting a massive vessel? As of late March 2025, clear, verifiable proof confirming large sections of a wooden ship structure was still lacking, leaving these claims highly speculative despite the reported dating. Finally, the geological context was stressed. The site's location in the Ararat Highlands, the biblical landing zone, combined with the marine sediments found at significant altitude, formed the cornerstone of the argument for a connection to the flood narrative. Researchers suggested that only a massive, possibly regional or even global inundation could explain these findings adequately. However, mainstream geologists offered alternative explanations, such as localized flooding trapped in basins, or more commonly the uplift of ancient seabeds due to the complex tectonic activity known in eastern Turkey, a region where continental plates collide. These natural processes, they argue, could deposit marine fossils at high elevations without requiring a biblical-scale flood. Findings like these, touching on deeply held beliefs and challenging established scientific views, inevitably provoke strong and divided reactions. So how did the various communities, scientific, archaeological, and religious, respond to these 2025 claims? The reaction was unsurprisingly polarized. On one side, proponents and believers saw the reported findings as potentially momentous. Researchers associated with creationist viewpoints and organizations dedicated to finding Ark evidence hailed the news as powerful, tangible support for a literal interpretation of the Genesis flood narrative. They emphasized the combination of factors: the precise location matching the biblical account, the striking dimensional similarities to the Ark, and most importantly, the newly reported marine sediments and fossils dated to the approximate time frame of the flood. For many, this confluence of evidence felt like more than coincidence, it felt like confirmation. The Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark research team itself expressed considerable optimism, reportedly discussing plans to secure funding for a dedicated visitor center at the Durupanar site. This move aimed not only to promote the discovery but also to facilitate further research and potentially protect the formation. The narrative presented was one of science potentially validating scripture. On the other side, skepticism prevailed within mainstream scientific and archaeological circles. Many geologists remained unconvinced, reiterating the long-held view that the Durupanar Formation is a natural syncline structure, a downward fold in rock layers, likely formed through geological processes like mud flows, landslides, or tectonic compression, shaping the underlying rock strata into a boat-like form. They pointed out that similar geological features exist elsewhere in the world. Critics highlighted the persistent lack of definitive, unambiguous evidence of a massive, man-made wooden vessel. Where were the vast quantities of worked timber beams, the internal structures, the metal fastenings, if any were used, or clear tool marks expected from constructing such a colossal ship? The reported traces of organic material or possible petrified wood, they argued, were insufficient proof and could potentially be explained by natural processes or later human activity unrelated to an ancient ark. Furthermore, the geological community largely rejects the premise of a single global flood occurring just 4,500 to 5,000 years ago, citing overwhelming evidence for continuous geological processes and regional rather than global flood events. The marine sediments, skeptics suggested, could be remnants of ancient seas uplifted over millions of years by tectonics, or perhaps evidence of localized, albeit large, ancient lakes or flooding, not necessarily Noah's flood. They called for the full peer-reviewed publication of the team's data before any conclusions could be drawn. Adding another layer to the discussion were alternative interpretations from historians and scholars of ancient texts. They often propose that the Noah story, while powerful, likely evolved from older Mesopotamian flood myths. The most famous parallel is the Epic of Gilgamesh, which predates the biblical account and tells of Utnapishtim, a man warned by a god to build a boat to survive a deluge sent by angry deities. Intriguingly, a related discovery reported in late 2024 involved the decipherment of a 3,000-year-old Babylonian tablet mentioning a journey to Urartu, the ancient kingdom centered around Lake Van encompassing the Ararat region. While not directly about a flood ark, this connection fueled speculation about the deep historical roots and cultural transmission of stories related to this specific geographical area, suggesting the biblical narrative might be part of a broader tradition rather than a unique historical event documented solely in Genesis. Of course, the 2025 excitement around Durupanar doesn't exist in a vacuum. The search for Noah's Ark has a long and often controversial history. How does this latest claim stack up against previous attempts, and how does it relate to the wider world of ancient flood stories? Indeed, the quest for Noah's Ark is littered with tantalizing clues, alleged discoveries, and subsequent debunkings. The Durupanar site itself has been a recurring character in this drama since the mid-20th century. Early explorers like Ron Wyatt made bold claims in the 1970s and 80s about finding petrified timber, iron rivets, and anchor stones, even using ground-penetrating radar, which he interpreted as showing internal structures. However, geological analyses consistently refuted his claims, identifying the rivets as natural mineral concentrations like pyrite and the anchor stones, drogue stones, as local volcanic rock, possibly used for ancient pagan or early Christian rites, but not definitively linked to the Ark. Wyatt's methods and conclusions remain highly controversial and are generally dismissed by mainstream science. Mount Ararat itself, the more literal interpretation of the biblical landing site, has seen its share of expeditions. Perhaps the most publicized recent claim came in 2010 when a joint Chinese-Turkish evangelical group, Noah's Ark Ministries International, announced they had found wooden compartments high on the mountain, around 4,000 meters, carbon dated to approximately 4,800 years ago. Images of wooden beams and internal spaces sparked global interest. However, this discovery quickly unraveled. Associates of the expedition alleged that the wooden structures had been fabricated and transported to the mountain by local workers hired by the team, essentially creating a hoax to attract attention and funding. Mainstream archaeologists and even some creationist organizations distanced themselves from the NAMI findings. More recently, in 2024, satellite imagery analysis by Ark researcher and explorer Gary Eastman highlighted another potential anomaly: a large, dark, ship-like shape seemingly buried beneath the ice cap near Ararat's summit. While intriguing, this remains an unverified remote sensing observation requiring extensive and dangerous high-altitude excavation to confirm what, if anything, lies beneath the glacier. So what makes the 2025 Darupanar claim different? Primarily, it's the backing of university-affiliated researchers employing modern analytical techniques like detailed soil/sediment analysis and dating methods, and presenting findings within a formal academic setting, the symposium. This lends it a veneer of scientific credibility absent from many earlier, more amateur efforts. However, the crucial caveat remains: as of late March 2025, the full data methodology and analysis had reportedly not been published in rigorous, peer-reviewed scientific journals. Until that happens, allowing independent scrutiny, the claims remain preliminary and speculative regardless of the researchers' affiliations. Beyond specific Ark searches, the broader context of ancient flood myths is essential. Nearly every major culture across the globe possesses some form of deluge story, from the Greek myth of Deucalion and Pyrrha to the Hindu story of Manu and the fish Matsya, to tales from indigenous peoples in the Americas and Australia. The sheer prevalence of these stories suggests either a shared human experience of catastrophic local floods that became mythologized, or perhaps the transmission of a core narrative across cultures over millennia. The Mesopotamian versions, particularly the Sumerian story of Ziusudra and the later Akkadian Babylonian accounts featuring Atrahasis and Utnapishtim in Gilgamesh, bear the most striking resemblances to the Genesis narrative in plot and detail, leading many scholars to believe they represent precursors or sister traditions to the biblical story. The idea isn't necessarily that one copied another, but that they all emerged from a shared cultural milieu in the ancient Near East, grappling with the reality of devastating river floods like those of the Tigris and Euphrates, and interpreting them through a theological lens. With all this historical context and scientific skepticism swirling around, what would it actually mean if the Darupanar site was somehow definitively proven to be the remains of Noah's Ark? And what are the next logical steps in this ongoing investigation? The implications, frankly, would be world-altering. If validated, confirming the Darupanar formation as Noah's Ark would send shockwaves through multiple fields. Scientifically, it would demand a radical reassessment of geological history and potentially provide concrete evidence for a catastrophic flood event on a scale previously dismissed by mainstream science, even if regional rather than global. Archaeologically, it would represent the discovery of arguably the most significant artifact in human history, offering unparalleled insights into ancient technology, materials, and the era described in Genesis. For religious communities, particularly those adhering to a literal interpretation of Judeo-Christian or Islamic scriptures, it would be seen as profound vindication, tangible proof of a foundational biblical narrative. The discovery could reshape the entire dialogue between faith and science, potentially bridging gaps for some while deepening divides for others. It would undoubtedly become a major pilgrimage site and a focal point for theological and historical debate for generations. However, we must return to the present reality as described in March 2025. The claims remain unproven. The path forward requires rigorous scientific process. The Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark research team continues its work, advocating for further, more extensive investigation, possibly including careful excavation in specific areas of the formation. International collaboration and funding would be essential for such a large-scale undertaking. Yet, the scientific community rightfully insists on the principle that extraordinary claims demand extraordinary evidence. This means meticulous documentation, transparent methodology, analysis by independent labs, and publication in high-impact peer-reviewed journals where the data can be thoroughly scrutinized by experts in geology, archaeology, paleontology, and materials science. Without this level of validation, the Darupanar site, however intriguing, remains an anomaly rather than proof. The burden of proof rests squarely on those making the claim. So, as of late March 2025, the saga of Noah's Ark and the Darupanar Formation stands at a familiar crossroads. We have intriguing, suggestive findings, a boat-like shape of biblical dimensions located in the right region, reportedly containing marine sediments from the plausible era. These elements understandably capture the imagination and offer hope to those seeking historical anchors for their faith. Yet, we lack the smoking gun, irrefutable proof of a massive wooden structure, confirmation untainted by ambiguity or alternative natural explanations. Is Darupanar a geological marvel mimicking an ancient legend, or could it truly be the vessel that survived the flood? For now, the mystery endures, a compelling blend of science, faith, and the enduring power of an ancient story. Only further research, rigorously conducted and openly shared, will reveal whether this is a groundbreaking discovery or simply the latest chapter in the long and fascinating search for Noah's Ark. The wait and the debate continue.